Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this AMPO webinar. A few more folks rolling in from the waiting room, but we will get going. My name is Ellen Zabiska. I serve as AMPO's Transportation Planning Manager. So glad to have you with us for this core products webinar. This webinar is part of our core products interest group. The interest group leaders help us choose topics and speakers for these webinars throughout the year. We could not do this without them. So really appreciate the work of those folks. And with that, I will do one quick housekeeping slide, ask you to keep your mic muted while our presenters are doing their thing. However, you are welcome to put comments and questions in the chat box at any time. We love a good side conversation. And we will, call on you to ask those questions, or our moderator will at the appropriate time. We do record these and we use the transcription just to put together the notes. We won't hold you to anything that you say during the webinar or in the chat. And then we will send out notes and the slides as well within a couple weeks, and ask you to put your organization name and your Zoom handle so that we know where you're joining us from. With that, I'm going to introduce today's moderator. Stephen serves on the staff of the Houston-Galveston Area Council, which is also the MPO for the Houston region. He's the lead regional transportation planner and the lead safety planner for that region. So he's got a lot on his plate. In addition to being part of our core products interest group leadership. And with that, I will ask Stephen to introduce our topic and our speakers for today.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. As she mentioned, my name is Stephen Keene. I'm a principal planner at the Houston-Galveston Area Council. Today we'll be discussing maximizing sponsor success by efficient coordination of TIP projects. A little bit to kind of explain the significance of this. We understand getting projects into a TIP, finalizing a TIP is a real achievement for MPOs, small and large. But how we get those projects to the finish line, to be let, to get into construction, can still be quite a large task. So today we'll have Sagnik Raha, also with HGAC, will present on HGAC's carryover spend down process and how it's resulted in more efficient quarterly meetings with project sponsors. While also giving an update, we're developing a milestone policy for projects that are stagnant within the TIP. Once Sagnik finishes his presentation, Ethan LaPointe and Adriana Jacobson with the Boston Region MPO will discuss their experiences with TIP projects and how they continue to curate policy in order to move projects towards implementation and avoid stagnation. So we're really talking about, these projects that are in our transportation improvement program, but how do we move them forward? How do we get them to the finish line? How do we help sponsors ensure that when they're listed in our TIP, that they're listed appropriately and correctly, when they need to move backward or forward, that happens at an appropriate time as well. But with that, I'll hand off to, well, first I'll discuss a little bit about Sagnik. Sagnik has been with the MPO for the past half year now, but he brings obviously more than 12 years of experience in civil engineering and project management throughout Texas. He serves as an engineer and a principal planner for our project delivery group. He is a Longhorn, which is a little strange in the Houston area, but we let it slide because he is a very great worker and teammate to have at HGAC. Ellen, would you like me to? Yeah, there we go. Okay. And then we have Ethan and Adriana with the Boston Region MPO. Ethan has a plethora of experience working with the MPOs, with the Boston Region MPO, as well as working with the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. And Adriana, as she mentioned in a previous meeting, she is born in Boston proper, works with the Boston Region MPO, and she both of them did great work on the presentation today, and we're really excited to have all of Sagnik, Ethan, and Adriana to put together a great webinar. So right now I will pass it over to Sagnik and
Okay.
we can get started.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't know it was gonna show up on the slides like that. Otherwise, I would have written like 2, 3 sentences, not like a whole paragraph. Sorry about that. I'm gonna share my screen. Bear with me because I don't use Zoom or yeah, Zoom usually. So, um, if it doesn't work, just let me know. Okay. All right. Okay. Um, Steven, we good?
Yes, sir.
You
Looks
see it?
good. Mhm.
Okay. All right. Let me minimize some screens here. Okay. So, as Steven mentioned, my name is Sagnik Raha. I also go by Nick. I'm a principal planner and engineer here at HGAC. My background is not Houston, so just FYI, it was just some random Zoom background that I found like a minute ago. Um, anyway, so I'll be presenting on our process for reducing carryover funding and maximizing project success by efficient project tracking, monitoring, coordination, and delivery. Okay, here's a brief overview and layout of the Houston Galveston Area Council, or HGAC, which is the Houston Region's MPO. We provide the 3 C's for transportation planning, which is continuous, cooperative, and comprehensive. We are in a non-attainment region. 8 counties are represented at the MPO. This includes over 60 project sponsors with a wide range of experience in project delivery and project development. Um, these sponsors range from 2 state DOTs, which are TxDOT Houston, TxDOT Beaumont. We have numerous cities, some big, some small, large counties, municipal districts, multiple transit agencies, and multiple ports. Within our current RTP cycle, we have over 900 individual projects, which equate to over $130 billion in expenditures. So, in 2022, HGAC staff was given the task to gauge project readiness for projects listed in the tip. The goal was to identify realistic letting dates for these projects and to reduce carryover balance issues. This was an important task because carryover balances over 200% for STBG and CMAC could result in loss of funds for the MPO and the region. CRP, or carbon reduction funds, were also prioritized at this time as they were a use it or lose it type of funds. So I guess to complete this task, the project development and delivery group at HGAC set up quarterly meetings with all the sponsors that have projects listed in the tip. And from these meetings, we found out that many of these projects were either not on schedule due to project development and delivery issues, or projects were just stagnant, as Stephen had just mentioned. And these issues led to some unready projects occupying limited funding space, which potentially delayed other projects that were possibly more prepared for it. So I'm not going to go over all these federal funds for transportation projects, but these are some of the primary ones that we use to fund our projects. But I will briefly just talk about CMAC and CRP. So CMAC funds are only for TMAs, which are MPOs with over 200,000 population that are in non-attainment areas. CMAC funding focuses on projects that reduce congestion and improve air quality to meet national ambient air quality standards. I kind of just found out what that meant. I just came from a air quality summit just this morning, so just I learned a lot. So anyway, so it's not as flexible of funding as STBG, and it is prioritized for projects that reduce congestion and improve air quality. Another thing to note is it specifically cannot fund projects that create new capacity for single occupancy vehicles. And for CRP, the carbon reduction program funds is a federal initiative to help reduce carbon emissions from transportation. For eligibility, recipients must develop a carbon reduction strategy and use these funds for projects like public transit improvements, bike and ped infrastructure, EV stations, traffic system improvements, to name a few. Okay. For carryover balance management, we had a carryover spend down policy that was drafted and implemented to address the carryover balance and was approved by our TPC or our policy council. Some of the strategies that were included in the policy are covering costs of inflation for projects that are needing to move to later fiscal years, prioritizing projects that are ready to let or have fund obligations in the next 0 to 2 years. Examples of these projects are basically more simple type of infrastructure projects, such as signing and striping or pavement marking, mill and overlay projects, ITS projects, reconstruction of sidewalks, to name a few. Additionally, it covered some E-phase or engineering/environmental phase projects that could have funds obligated by or before August 2026. Swapping funds was another strategy which involved replacing local money with federal money through transportation development credits. Transit projects was another strategy that was used widely, and it effectively obligated funds for E-phase or C-phase from FHWA, but were transferred to FTA to manage. So as soon as they were transferred to FTA, they were essentially obligated. And as mentioned, we utilize carbon reduction program funds by prioritizing these projects that were eligible and ready to be let or obligated before the expiration of August 2026. Oops. Okay. So the main task for the MPO staff was to set up a call for projects that were projects that were ready to let between the 0 to 2 year time frame. These solicitations were conducted in three parts or three phases. From March to September 2023, $335 million on 60 projects from 25 sponsors were identified to be let within fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25. A good amount of them were projects in fiscal year 23 that needed to be moved, and then some addressed cost increase requests. From March to August 2024, $65 million from 8 sponsors were identified to be let in fiscal year 25. And from September to November 2024, $600 million on 60 projects were identified as ready to let in fiscal year 2026, which is the last year for carryover spend down. So this is just a timeline of carryover spend on events that I just discussed. The purple shows the timing of when the project screening tool was developed to be used during the solicitation process. And also we show the quarterly meetings that were also done, shown in the purple as well, that helped with the screening as well. And then we have the first solicitation, second solicitation, and third solicitation with the amount of money that was programmed for each of those projects, for each of those phases, sorry. So as of today, we now have a more accurate picture of when projects are ready for construction. However, we're still working through some hurdles to make sure the projects that were programmed to use carryover spend on funds will make it before the deadline of August 2026. STIP delays being one of those hurdles. As projects go through programming, they need to go through FHWA review before funds are obligated. And a lot of these issues, or I guess some of these issues, were related to unclear project information, such as unclear scope and unclear limits. And because of this, HCAC is working to create an SOP of project descriptions for future projects to reduce STIP delays. Another major hurdle was fiscal year delays on program projects. So even with the carryover spend down call for projects with a specific timeline known, which is a deadline of August 2026, some projects are still being delayed due to project development and delivery elements. And for this, one of the reasons of this is or I guess, sorry, one of the one of the effects of that is we are currently working to create a project development and delivery milestone policy, as Stephen discussed earlier, to address programming projects in correct fiscal years by understanding the overall risk of the project and baseline schedule of the project, which we'll cover shortly. So to conclude on carryover spend on policy, one of the main points of the policy was again to keep the carryover fund manageable, which meant keeping the carryover amount to 200% or under. So any funds over 200% leave the region and go back to the state to decide how to use it. Additionally, another main point of the carryover spend down initiative and policy is to show federal agencies that HGAC, as the MPO, can deliver projects on time and efficiently while reducing the risk of high carryover balances so that any future funding given to the region are not reduced. So earlier I touched a little on the quarterly meetings that were conducted, and Stephen as well discussed a little bit about it. These were conducted with our sponsors during the solicitation process for the carryover spend on, but we are currently still doing this in our project delivery group, which I am a part of. The purpose of this is to make sure the federally funded projects stay on track by reviewing progress, identifying any risks, being able to discuss through issues and potentially resolve them, as well as coordinating with necessary agencies like TxDOT, um, our multiple transit agencies, big cities, small cities, whatever. And with the meetings, we come up with any action items and try to address them as soon as possible so we can just keep it moving. So to reduce the amount of carryover spend down, and reduce the overall risk of lapsing projects. As I mentioned, we are working to create a milestone policy. Currently, we're in the draft phase and hoping to have TPC approve it later this year or early next year. I know it's those are really strong goal to have, but as you know, it's really important to not have high carryover balances. We want to keep the funding consistent in our area, so it's very important for our TPC right now. And anyway, the policy covers how the MPO, in conjunction with local government sponsors, can manage and mitigate risks and ensure timely delivery of our TIP projects. And by holding these quarterly meetings, our group, the project delivery group, review the projects with the sponsors to make sure they are meeting the milestone and baseline schedules of the programmed fiscal year obligation for each project. So the schedules that are discussed in the quarterly meetings, as we call baseline schedules, are used for project readiness as well, and they are in the form of these Gantt-style schedules that show planned start and end dates for major milestones and deliverables. We use these baseline schedules to analyze against actual progress versus expected progress. So currently in our group, we're working to refine these schedules with some of our agencies like TxDOT Houston and TxDOT Beaumont for different types of major projects where we can establish, the major milestones, the critical path of the projects to ensure sponsors are staying on the agreed upon schedule to achieve their obligation or their obligated fiscal year date. Sorry. The goal of assessing risk is primarily to avoid massive carryover balances and stagnant projects. This is completed by using a risk register or risk matrix, whatever you want to call it, and working with the local government sponsors to fill them out as early as possible in the process. Hopefully, it's during the project readiness screening or when the meeting or when we meet with the sponsors for the first time, as soon as the project has funding commitment. And then during the quarterly meetings, the risk register or risk matrix will be updated based on the project delivery process and also throughout the project lifecycle or until the obligation is met. And this risk register will include quantitative and qualitative measures for any identified or perceived risks that could pop up on a project. And these measures will create an overall score or an average score, which will help the MPO, sponsors, TAC, and TPC formulate necessary decisions to be made. And that's all I have. Thank you for listening to me. I guess I'm taking questions now or later.
I think we'll go later towards the after Ethan and Adrian's presentation.
Okay.
But thank you, Simon, for the presentation. We do have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to pop it up.
No, it's
I'm
okay.
struggling with this.
Yeah, so we've been answering one question we had is, did your previous call for projects allocate 100% of the anticipated funds? And so talking like I know we've been here a little less than a year, but what I answered is um, I don't know if those funds were 100% allocated since we hadn't had a call for project since 2018. Um, what we do know is part of the reason we had a carryover spend down issue was because we hadn't had an update a call for project since then. Um, but our main issue is even if it was 100% allocated, we did not get enough projects to the finish line at that point. And that's something that with the milestone policy, with having those quarterly meetings, we're able to hopefully streamline and get to the point where it's not much of an issue anymore.
Yes.
Um,
And Stephen, just to add on that, like, so this was done kind of like um they're just not haphazardly, but like that's kind of like a way to say it. It's just happened really quick. The call for projects happened really quick. Tried to get as many projects as you could
mhm.
as you could to finish within the 0 to 2 years. And as imaginable, it's not easy to find a project with this federal money to be completed that quickly because as some of them are still in the design phase, and sometimes the design can take anywhere from 1 to 2 years, right? So and you're also committing to let that project also within 0 to 2 years. That's already kind of hard. So it's sometimes it went to more of the shovel ready type of projects, which believe it or not is actually harder to find than you would think. So um yeah, I hope that answers that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question we had from Rachel, what applications are you using to track the projects? We're currently using Excel, looking for something more dynamic.
Yeah.
That is something that we've been talking about a lot.
Yeah.
And we've had several comments in the chat box talking about Eco Interactive and other companies that are able to help with the tracking. Um, I know on HVAC side, we're undergoing procurement process right now for a new transportation project database.
Mhm.
So, I mean, is there anything on the project delivery side that's 0 to 2 years that y'all are looking at to track those projects to even closer than that?
Yeah. So the ultimate goal, as Steven said, is to have that database that we're working to procure. And one of the main things there is going to be, hey, like how do we create this sort of Gantt type schedule that can help us and establish these critical paths, these baseline schedules into that database. That's the goal. That's my wish list, or I guess that's our wish list really. But currently we use an Excel spreadsheet. One of our former staff members in our group actually created this based off of her experience in project delivery and coordination with agencies as well, and that was used. I was basically she used it to meet with these sponsors and see where they are currently on that project in that schedule, and bluntly telling them, hey, you're way back over here. There's no way you're going to be able to finish this within 0 to 2 years. Or some are like, all right, you're right in the middle. You've already done your environmental, this, that, and you can definitely, use these funds to finish your project in 0 to 2 years. So, long story
Absolutely.
short, she used a uh, schedule on Excel, and which we have right now, but that's not the ultimate goal. We would like to use it in some sort of application. We're currently looking at some other things in the meantime before this database is procured. So
Absolutely. And then, we have one more question in the chat from James. How do others cope with project sponsors and their consulting engineers telling us what they think we want to hear versus what we need to hear so that we can adjust project schedules to keep fiscal constrained?
yeah, sure. I'm gonna answer on behalf of just like talking to the sponsors who don't have the consultants on board and stuff like that. Um, Most of the sponsors that we talk to have not actually debated anything that we've said, which has been really nice. Um, we use that schedule that was created with our former staff members' experience, that has that timeline with critical paths and critical milestones, letting them know that, hey, like you need that agreement with TxDOT. TxDOT has the funding for that. We have to, or it's on TxDOT's roadway, or it's on system, so like stuff like that. So they
Mhm.
they know that they need these agreements. It's just sometimes takes a while to get it, and sometimes that can delay, or that can delay their project. But ultimately, like for a construction project, they have to follow TxDOT's guidelines and regulations. You got to get the agreement. Then you got to have TxDOT review, and the TxDOT review could take 3 to 4 weeks per submittal based off of how detailed their design is, or if they're missing critical points on their design. So it's not we're it's kind of weird to say, but we're almost like the messenger here between TxDOT uh, for for project delivery, because TxDOT has basically the overall uh, I guess, if TxDOT doesn't agree with your plans, then you theoretically cannot go out and construct it. So um, I hope that makes sense. They haven't really debated much with us on these things.
Absolutely. And also that the development of the milestone policy
Yes,
backs up those
correct.
questions that,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
actually, Stephen, I'm glad you brought that up. Just real quick. The policy group that's helping to create this policy right now, it's a work group. It consists of people from TxDOT, and just basically everyone in our MPO who wanted to contribute to the work group, which is TxDOT Houston. We got TxDOT Beaumont, big transit agencies, all these guys, all these
sponsors.
people. Yeah, all these
Mhm.
sponsors are really involved in here. Um, so they all know.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think those are the end of the questions in the chat. I think
Okay.
we'll we'll move to a polling question, but thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, no problem.
So before we move on to Ethan and Adriana's presentation, I will launch a poll. The question is, does your MPO set milestones to keep project moving? So yes, and we enforce them. Yes, but they're not really enforced, or no. I can see here is pretty even distribution. Um, Looks like we're getting a lot of yes, but they're not really enforced, which we definitely understand that. Okay. So yes, but not really enforced, about 18 out of 40, 45%. And yes, we enforce them, about 25%, good for y'all. And then no, 30%. So, okay, I'll end that poll, and then I'll hand it over to Ethan and Adriana to do the second half of the webinar.
Thanks, Stephen, and good afternoon, everybody. While Adriana's getting the slides up, I'll just introduce myself real quick. I'm Ethan Lapointe. I am a senior planner on staff for the Central Transportation Planning staff. We work for the Boston Region MPO. So it's pretty good that the questions from the last presentation ended up where they did, as our presentation today, we can please go on to the next slide, is actually about some of the policies that we have been working to try to implement, but really iterate upon and build upon to address persistent project delays, scope, and cost changes in our transportation improvement program. So I'm going to start off in this presentation by doing an overview of what the Boston Region TIP is and looks like. We're also going to then get into just a brief description of how projects are being developed within the Boston region, and then some of the headwinds that many of our locally led projects have been encountering. We do have some existing policies that our MPO adopted a few years back that we'll cover, but given it has been a few years, we're also going to get into some of the lessons learned and how we're working to iterate upon some of these policies going forward, and of course, culminating in some key takeaways. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to our region on the next slide, please. So the Boston region has 97 municipalities in it. This is about 3.4 million people and 2 million jobs. In terms of geography here, we are in New England, so we're actually, well, it's 97 municipalities. It goes only about 40 miles to the west of Boston, and then about 30 to 35 miles to the north or south. So not actually geographically a particularly large area, but a lot of different municipal partners, and we scale from either major metropolitan zones all the way down to some fairly rural communities, and that leads to a lot of different transportation needs and experiences, despite the fact that many of our communities are navigating through these same kinds of design processes and federal requirements. Now, on the next slide, I'll then get into describing what the Boston Region TIP is. So, just some basics here. Our transportation improvement program is a 5-year capital plan that we update annually for all of our projects. All 5 of those years are fiscally constrained, and with each year that we update our TIP, we also conduct a new project solicitation. And usually those projects are going for that 5th year of the TIP. So for example, the one that will be taking effect on October 1st is our 2026 to 30 program. Most of the projects that we're applying through the solicitation, we're seeking 2030 funding. I'll also note before we get into the next slide that we usually refer to our TIP in 3 different areas. We have our transit program, which is operated by our the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, or MBTA, along with 2 of our regional transit authorities. The statewide highway program, those are usually projects that are prioritized by our state DOT, MassDOT, and then the focus of today's presentation is our regional target program. That is the amount of funding that our MPO has direct discretion over. On this next slide, we'll actually put it in some numbers. So the 2026-30 TIP for the Boston region has $10.3 billion of federally funded transportation investments. The bulk of that is coming from the MBTA's program, that transit program. There's about $1.8 billion of MassDOT projects in our region over the next 5 years. The target program has $754 million. So during this presentation, when we're talking about MPO-funded target projects, we are talking about the ones funded within there. And on the next slide, we have broken out our $754 million into different investment programs, and we have classified some of these investment programs differently based on the type of design work required to administer them, and generally what the scale goes to. On the next slide, I'm going to then pass it over to Adriana, if we can go there, to start describing what we call our core investment program projects, namely referring to the projects that represent the bulk of all of the funding in the TIP that go through the design process and are subject to the policies we'll be talking about today. There's 58 projects in the TIP. The majority of these projects are these core ones, and without further ado, I will pass it over to Adriana.
Thank you, Ethan. So our core investment projects include local priority roadway improvement projects. So this category doesn't include our funding for design, for transit projects, or what we call micro projects such as bike share or other smaller projects like that. Most of these are corridor or intersection improvement projects. And the cost of these projects vary by the specific project type. For example, corridor improvements and active transportation projects like rail trails tend to fall in the $10 to $40 million range. Intersection improvements are smaller, usually in the $5 million range, and our major infrastructure projects are over $50 million. So the design process and the funding process of our core investment projects are done in parallel. So when the project is in its conceptual stage, the municipal proponents will hold conversations with MassDOT staff, MassDOT is our state DOT, and MPO staff. Then on the design side, the proponents will send in a project need form, project initiation form, and go through the project review committee or PRC approval process. Then on the funding side, usually when the project is in a more conceptual stage, we'll add the project to the universe of projects, which is our illustrative list for projects on the MPO's radar. When the project reaches PRC approval, it is eligible to send in an application for TIP funding, and MPO staff will evaluate and score the project, and the MPO board will consider it for funding. And although the MPO board does consider projects at the PRC approval stage, we typically prefer a 25% design. So throughout this process, there is a lot of back and forth communication with our state DOT. And as you can imagine, this leads to some conflicting funding decisions. MassDOT administers the design process, and they might have different standards or priorities than the MPO or the municipal proponents, or consultants, or other stakeholders. And sometimes the project information can end up siloed, and the MPO staff and board might not hear about key readiness issues or scope changes until later. We broke down some of the issues that the MPO faces into these 4 categories. First, project costs are increasing and projects are frequently delayed. For example, in this federal fiscal year, 7 out of the 8 original core investment projects were delayed, and these projects experienced a collective cost increase of over $50 million. Next, design standards and processes are also constantly changing, leading to last-minute scope changes and a consistent issue of scope creep. On that note, the MPO staff often have outdated project information. So some of these projects have been on the tip for 10 years because of delays. And so staff turnover on the municipal and the MPO side contributes to lack of information on both what the project was in its original state and what the scope is now. So for example, if original project elements that might have made the project a priority 10 years ago, such as a protected bike lane or stormwater improvements, etc., those might not even be in the project scope anymore. We might not really know about those updates on a timely basis. Lastly, we have the issue of negative optics of penalizing projects even when they experience these 3 aforementioned issues. It can be very difficult to remove or even to delay these projects because it requires board members to single out certain projects or municipalities, and that can be politically challenging. I mentioned the issue of rising costs, and here's a quick visualization. So each bar on this chart is a project that advertised within the last 3 years. So we have a pretty gradual range of project costs. On the left, projects, around 5 million, projects to about 25 million on the right. But this is in comparison to now, so the next 3 years of projects, this is the same y-axis. So in just a couple of years, project costs have really spiked. We still have these smaller scale projects in the $5 million range, but we have an increasing number of projects over $30 million. And these are projects that are growing in cost every year. We're getting yearly cost increases. So and we are kind of missing this middle range of projects in the kind of $10 to $30 million range. As I mentioned before, each project year seems to have more and more delays. So some projects were even delayed multiple years. So in each federal fiscal year, it gets delayed back 1 year. As you can see, 3 out of the 9 projects delayed in federal fiscal year 2025 were also delayed in 2024. So yeah, it's just this recurring issue of projects being delayed last minute for multiple years in a row when it might have made more sense to delay a project several years all at once. This 2026 number might be a little bit of an underestimation because we often end up delaying projects last minute during the spring to development cycle. And lastly, before I hand it over to Ethan, another issue that we've been facing is the changing standard of the 25% design. As I mentioned before, our board places a lot of importance on the 25% design standard. but it's getting more difficult to achieve. What this graph shows, so the blue bar on the left shows how long projects from the past 3 years took to get from the PRC approval stage to the 25% design stage, about 1.5 years on average. The red bar on the left shows how long projects programmed to advertise in the next 3 years took from PRC approval to 25% design. So it's almost doubling the time it takes to get to the first design stage. Although the silver lining is that we have it takes less time to achieve 75% design because a lot of the work has already been done in the 25% design stage. It still means that there is a longer design process overall. And this can be a barrier for smaller communities who may struggle to commit to funding design for a project that it does not have secured construction funding. And I'll pass it back over to.
Thank you, Adriana, for sending the background there. So these have been issues that our MPO, and I'd imagine many of your MPOs, have been facing similar challenges for the past few years. As I mentioned at the onset of this presentation, in addition to working on policies right now, our MPO had adopted a policy that was attempting to mitigate many of these cost challenges back in 2021. They were adopted September 2021. They were meant to be in effect for the development of our 2023-27 TIP, and technically they were. More on that in a sec. But really, there were 3 major interventions, and they were centered around trying to ensure that that 25% design status was enforced and required for all new projects added to the TIP, improving communication channels to reduce silos between different stakeholders, so our project proponents, their consultants, our state DOT, and also MPO staff, making MPO staff a more critical part of the communication chain rather than solely being involved more when funding was needed, and also incorporating a rescoring policy to ensure that MPO staff could potentially get access to updated project scopes and other materials to make sure that if a project has been on the TIP for 10 years, that it is not using a 10-year-old evaluation score when it is being considered for funding. Now, each of these policies had their own flaws when it actually came to implementation for these past few years. If we can go on to the next slide, I'll start off with that design status. So in some ways, depending on who you may ask, to be frank, the 25% design standard that our board elected to set for the programming of projects in the TIP only applied for new projects somewhat deliberately. It did not affect many of the projects that were already on the TIP. And frankly, during this past year's TIP development process, the majority of the projects that were being delayed and have been delayed repeatedly were funded before this policy actually took effect. It's also worth noting that this policy never considered the possibility that projects may still encounter cost increases or further delays on their way to 75 or 100% design. Worth noting, in Massachusetts, we don't have a 50% for those curious. Moreover, because there were so many different stakeholders in our process, there were many different individuals that defined 25% design differently. A municipality that may have been trying to get funding or their consultant may have had a much lower threshold than our state DOT, who may assume that 25% design means everything has to be approved and in place. What we've actually seen in looking at projects is that there's about a 3 to 5 year difference between different definitions and design stages of just the 25% threshold. Bottom line for this first intervention is that we increased the barrier to entry to get on the TIP, but that was a standard that was not set equally for all projects, and it did not address the challenges for the projects that were already on the TIP. The second intervention, if we can go on to the next slide, meant that there was more new touch points created between our project proponents and MPO staff, and especially I'll give credit to our state DOT, who has been improving the way with which they provide information and more granular updates on specific project milestones to MPO staff. But one of the issues is that with new information being provided to our MPO board for decision-making around scenarios, there may be better information, but a decision still has to be made. And there was no enforcement mechanism as part of this policy to actually make that decision. And because the board would have to vote to make changes to a single project, that created a difficult perception that the board may be voting to single out a project. Without getting into too many details, many of our board members, while they are represented directly by elected officials, are actually or the people that are attending our MPO meetings are typically local or professional staff who may not be empowered to make these kinds of decisions on behalf of their community at risk of potential unfair retribution. Basically, the immediate consequences of these decisions to the communities making the votes were often weighed against the long-term implications for the health of the program, and those immediate consequences always won out. And then third, lastly, on the next slide, the policy for project rescoring when costs increase beyond a specific threshold, that had the exact same issues as even the prior policy, as our board was worried that if a project was rescored, even though that is just getting more up-to-date and accurate information, there were concerns that, well, having better information may force the board's hand to make a kind of decision about or reconsideration of the project's funding status. Moreover, when it comes to rescoring, the conditions under which we would, as MPO staff, know that a project should be rescored during our annual TIP development would happen in late February. We would have to have a TIP draft out for public comment first week of April. That basically gave MPO staff about 4 weeks at most to conduct a full solicitation and reevaluation of any of the projects that our board had voted to select for rescoring. So not only did it have the same political concerns, but in terms of logistics, it was not feasible for implementation. If we could go on to the next slide. The bottom line here is that based on these 2021 policies, they were well developed and thought through, but they were almost, or I should say, very difficult to enforce. After 4 TIP cycles in place, the policy has only ever been cited by our board in preventing new projects from being funded. And even then, this little graph on screen here demonstrates that it was selectively enforced whenever there were low application volumes like we saw during COVID. Now, unfortunately, or rather fortunately, application volumes have returned following COVID, but the financial situation of our program is not actually enabling us to fund these new projects. And in response to that, and also trying to preserve and advance the projects that our MPOs already funded, we are working to develop new revised policies that have automatic triggers that don't require votes from our MPO board to reduce those concerns about political blowback. Namely, setting design thresholds for all 5 of our constrained years, not just when you're trying to get on the TIP, and an automatic rescoring for any project on the TIP over 5 years. And again, these are iterative. They are reinforcing the existing policy, not substituting them. If we can go on to the next slide, the table here actually shows what the still draft milestone policy would look like. But the bottom line here is we want to set a uniform standard across all of our TIP years in our program that levels the playing field. If you are one of our 97 communities that is on the TIP, you should be held to the same standard for readiness as a community that is one of our 97 that is not on the TIP. And moreover, if this is a standard and it is something that is fair and balanced for all projects, it is a shield that can insulate individual decision makers on our board from unfair consequences or retribution from those who may seek to, for lack of a better way of putting it, get back at them for holding their project accountable. We are really approaching this from the lens of accountability and transparency through our project development process. Now, again, there's a few caveats if we can go on to the next slide. These are still in development. We are still working with our MPO board this fall to get these new updates in effect for our 2027 to 31 program. But we, as MPO staff, really view these policies as critical tools to advancing them. At the end of the day, though, adoption of these policies is up to our MPO board, and the actual consequences for not following these kinds of guidelines are not yet codified. I was reviewing the chat earlier during the previous presentation. I know folks have alluded to strikes and other delays, and I will say that this is something that we have definitely considered as MPO staff as we've been thinking through this policy, but that is likely going to be the most difficult part of getting something implemented for our MPO. As historically, our MPO has tended towards lax enforcement of any policy that we implement for our TIP, as I discussed previously. So with that, if we can go on to the next 2 slides, and before we wrap up at least this presentation, some key takeaways here. We do have an advantage in Massachusetts as each of our MPOs updates our TIP annually. And when you update your tip annually, this enables nimble decision making. Now, I will also say that updating a 5-year tip every single year is a very high level of effort, but it also helps to make sure that our MPO board is well abreast of tip development cycles and or tip development issues and trends between each of these different cycles. We've been able to sustain momentum when it comes to talking about these issues, as while that same timeline may hinder our ability to really react well when different tip challenges emerge, it does allow us to make sure that nobody forgets what the key issues facing our program are. But to that same end, when there is limited time to make a decision, that first attempt, if your MPO is trying to establish a programming policy, is quite unlikely to address every issue. But fortunately, because we have an iterative framework that we can operate within for the Boston region, we are able to iterate upon something, a policy that our MPO board has already adopted. And that is easier to do than trying to introduce something entirely new, even if it is a difficult journey ahead. And lastly, this is, I think, a little bit more of a abstract question. And it is a question of who controls the capital program and the health of the program of projects. And really, it is a balance that shifts depending on the overall health of the program to ensure that these projects can be delivered. The question is, how much involvement does the MPO board have versus staff in terms of actually making decisions about where projects should be funded and where recommendations are made versus decisions? Should there be actions on specific projects, or should policies look to only address a general theme? And one thing that we've really learned is that reluctance to act and make difficult decisions should not lead to inaction. Otherwise, you may not have a tip that you can actually get approved in terms of fiscal constraint. Really, when you're updating your tip every single year, it's about keeping one eye on the short term as far as what you need to do to keep the projects moving ahead in the current fiscal year, and another on that longer term, recognizing that these new initiatives are not going to fix things immediately. We've heard from some of our board members and our proponents that these policies are controversial because they believe they are treating symptoms and not curing the root causes of project delays. But we need to address these kinds of issues now in order to attain fiscal constraint. And the balance of responsibility to resolve these challenges is going to shift over time, depending on the overall health of your program. So with that, that is all I had for this presentation. I'm happy to pass the floor back and answer any questions folks have.
All right, thank you, Ethan. Like I did with Sognick, I'll go into the chat. Kristen asked, how do you verify 25% design?
That is a rabbit hole. So as far as verification of 25% design, the reason why our MPO established that as a threshold was that our MPO believed it was a point where most scope changes were ironed out. We had a pretty good idea of what the cost was at that stage, and the alternatives as well for different project types were probably ironed out. Now, that doesn't answer the question, but really it was mostly making sure that we could mitigate and minimize the potential for changes. In reality, there are still changes we see past 25%. We even see plenty of projects with multiple 25% submissions. And within that definition of 25, we have seen people say that it is 25% prepared, a 25% they've submitted to the DOT, a 25% our DOT has commented on, all the way up to a 25% design public hearing. And again, I mentioned earlier, there can be a 3 to 5 year difference between what stage of 25 you're actually at. And as Adriana presented earlier, that 25% design goalpost has been moving very quickly and moving up over the past couple of years.
So, one other question we have in the chat from Todd, and this I may tweak this question slightly. He asked, did your previous call for projects allocate 100% of the anticipated funds? That was during Sonic's presentation, but do y'all have a policy that 100% of anticipated funds should be allocated? Is that something that you have a policy for, or is something that just happens naturally? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So we do not have a policy that directly addresses that. I will say, as I'm sure is the case with many of you who are managing your own tips, there are priorities that shift over time. Over the last few years, our board had preferred not funding, leaving more money in the outer years in the case of cost increases. But then in recent years, we found that by leaving money available for cost increases, it was almost enabling projects to accommodate cost increases without much scrutiny. This past year, we did program 100%, but that 100% of the funding only went to one. So we took in, I want to say, about a little over a dozen applications. We only funded one of them. The rest of the money went to cost overruns and enabling additional delays for projects, just to keep them on the tip instead of removing them from the tip. So in recent years, we've kind of run out of the runway where now we are programming 100%. That is not something we try to do. Ideally, we want to very meaningfully balance the needs of new projects and the ones we already have.
Great. I don't see any other questions in the chat, nor do I see any hands raised. So Ethan, Adriana, thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate y'all coming here and sharing the challenges and hopefully future triumphs of the Boston Region MPO. But I think that's all we have for the webinar. Ellen, I don't know if you're.
I'm still here.
Yeah, great, good. Thankfully, I can pass it off to you.
Of course. I want to share your thanks for our speakers, Ethan, Adriana, and Nick. Really appreciate the three of you joining us today to share your insight. I feel like this is one of those things that none of us have got perfectly figured out, but we can all learn from each other, and that's what these webinars are about. So thank you so much for sharing what you've learned and thought about. Stephen, thank you for pulling this together. We could not do these webinars without interest group leaders such as yourself. And again, thank you to everyone who joined us. There was a great back and forth in the chat that I loved reading, and it got me thinking about, we've got a technical symposium coming up for AMPO next spring in Lexington, Kentucky. We're going to open up the call for projects for that soon. If you don't get AMPO's emails, you can sign up for our emails on the website and find out when that call for projects opens up, or call for proposals. Maybe we need to have like a workshop or something on great tip practices. If you have something that you're doing at your MPO that works, or you have some thoughts, or you know of another MPO that's doing something great in that area, we love to have those core products presentations or workshops or panels, either for the tech symposium next spring or for the annual conference next fall, any of those. So we'd love to hear about that stuff at our conferences, and we'd love to see you again at one of our webinars very soon. So thank you so much for joining us. Hope to see you soon, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.